The screaming started at dawn, and Marcus Williams knew right then and there that everything folks had been whispering about for the past 3 days was stone-cold real. He'd been up on the roof of Patterson's hardware store since 4 in the morning, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and watching the empty streets of Millbrook with eyes that hadn't seen proper sleep in 72 hours. The town looked peaceful enough in that purple-gray light before sunrise, all quiet storefronts and dark windows, the kind of small-town American scene that belonged on a postcard. But Marcus wasn't fooled anymore. He'd seen what was coming down Highway 40, had watched through binoculars as neighboring towns went dark one by one, their lights winking out like candles in the wind. When old Mrs. Patterson started shrieking from somewhere over on Maple Street, when that sound cut through the morning air like a knife through butter, Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed the walkie-talkie clipped to his belt and pressed the button so hard his thumb went white. "This is Marcus on the hardware store roof," he said, his voice steady despite the ice water flooding his veins. "It's happening. They're here. Wake everybody up and get the plan moving. We got maybe minutes, not hours." The walkie crackled with static, then Jake Morrison's voice came through, thick with sleep but sharpening fast. "You sure, man? You actually see them?" Marcus swept his binoculars across the street and felt his stomach drop like a stone. There were maybe a dozen figures stumbling around the intersection of Main and Maple, moving with that wrong, jerky motion that had been all over the news before the broadcasts stopped. They were surrounding something on the ground, and Marcus didn't need to guess what, or who. "Yeah, I'm sure," he said quietly. "Get everyone to the community center. Now." The plan had been thrown together just 2 days ago when the internet still worked, when folks could still watch the footage coming out of Chicago and Atlanta and Los Angeles, those nightmare scenes of cities tearing themselves apart. Millbrook was a town of maybe 800 people, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody and strangers stuck out like a sore thumb. That had always seemed like a weakness to Marcus when he was younger, part of why he'd left for college in Boston, but now it might be their biggest strength. When the mayor, Bill Hendricks, had called an emergency town meeting at the community center, nearly everyone had shown up. They'd watched the news reports together, seen the chaos spreading like wildfire across the country, and made a choice. They weren't running. They were staying put and turning Millbrook into a fortress. Marcus scrambled down from the roof, his boots clanging on the metal ladder, and hit the ground running. The hardware store was 3 blocks from the community center, and he covered the distance in under 2 minutes, his breath coming in hard gasps. The streets were still mostly empty, but he could hear more screaming now, coming from different directions. Windows were lighting up all over town as people woke to the nightmare. Marcus nearly crashed into Tommy Garcia, who came barreling around the corner of the post office with his hunting rifle in hand and pure terror written across his face. "They got the Johnsons," Tommy panted, skidding to a stop. "All 3 of them. I saw it from my window. We gotta move, Marcus. We gotta move right now." "That's what we're doing," Marcus said, grabbing Tommy's shoulder and steering him toward the community center. "Stick to the plan, brother. We planned for this." But even as he said it, Marcus felt doubt gnawing at his gut. Planning was one thing. Living through it was something else entirely. They'd spent 2 days fortifying the community center, boarding up windows, stockpiling supplies, setting up a perimeter. The building was solid brick, built in the 1950s when folks didn't cut corners, with only 3 entrances and a flat roof perfect for keeping watch. If they could get everyone inside and hold out, maybe they'd have a chance. Maybe. The community center parking lot was already filling up when Marcus and Tommy arrived. Cars were pulling in from every direction, families spilling out with whatever they'd managed to grab, kids crying, adults shouting questions all at once. Marcus spotted Jake Morrison standing on the front steps, directing traffic like he was conducting an orchestra. Jake was a big guy, former Army, the kind of dude who stayed calm when everything went to hell. Right now, that was exactly what Millbrook needed. Families with young kids inside first, Jake was hollering, his voice carrying across the chaos. "Everyone else, grab supplies from your cars and haul them in. We're not making multiple trips. Move it, people." Rachel Kowalski came running up with her daughter Amy clutched in her arms and her son Derek stumbling along behind her. Her husband had been in Denver on business when the outbreak started, and nobody had heard from him since the phones went dead. "Marcus, is this really happening?" she asked, and the fear in her eyes just about broke his heart. "Are we gonna be okay?" Marcus wanted to tell her yes, wanted to promise that everything would be fine, but he'd never been good at lying. "We're gonna fight like hell to be okay," he said instead. "Get inside, Rachel. Stay close to Jake." The next 20 minutes were pure chaos, the kind that would have been funny if it wasn't so damn terrifying. People were hauling in everything but the kitchen sink, bags of groceries and camping gear and weapons that ranged from deer rifles to baseball bats. Old Mr. Chen showed up with a sword he claimed was from World War II, though Marcus had his doubts. The Kowalski kid, Derek, was crying because they'd had to leave his Xbox behind. Somebody's dog got loose and started barking its head off, and that was when Marcus heard the first moans coming from down the street. "Inside, now!" Jake roared, and the stragglers didn't need to be told twice. Marcus helped drag the last few people through the doors, then threw his shoulder against the heavy metal frame as Jake and Tommy started sliding the reinforced bar into place. Through the glass panel in the door, Marcus could see them coming, maybe 20 or 30 of those things, stumbling into the parking lot with their arms outstretched and their mouths hanging open. Some of them had been neighbors. Marcus recognized Pete Sullivan from the gas station, still wearing his uniform shirt soaked with something dark. He recognized Amy Martinez, who'd served him coffee just yesterday morning at the diner. Now they were something else, something hungry and dead and wrong. "Don't look," Jake said quietly, and Marcus realized he'd been staring. "Nothing we can do for them now." The bar slid home with a metallic clang that echoed through the foyer, and for a moment, everyone just stood there breathing hard and listening to the moans outside. Then Bill Hendricks, the mayor, stepped up. Bill was pushing 70, white-haired and soft around the middle, but his voice still had that authority that made people listen. "All right folks, listen up," he said, raising his hands for quiet. "I know you're scared. Hell, I'm scared too. But we've got a plan, and we're gonna stick to it. This building is secure. We've got food and water for at least 2 weeks. We've got weapons and people who know how to use them. What we need now is organization and discipline. Can I count on you for that?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, not exactly enthusiastic but determined. Marcus did a quick head count and came up with about 140 people, maybe 150. Less than a quarter of the town's population. His chest tightened as he thought about all the folks who hadn't made it, who'd been too slow or too far away or too stubborn to believe the danger was real. But there was no time for mourning, not yet. Jake was already dividing people into groups, assigning tasks like they'd discussed. The community center had a main hall, a kitchen, 2 bathrooms, and 3 smaller rooms that usually got used for meetings and craft classes. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Marcus found himself assigned to the security team along with Jake, Tommy Garcia, and half a dozen others who had military or law enforcement experience. Their job was to keep watch, maintain the perimeter, and make sure nothing got inside. Lisa Chen, who ran the town library and had a medical degree she never used, took charge of the medical supplies with a couple of volunteer nurses. Rachel Kowalski, despite everything she was dealing with, stepped up to organize food rationing and meal preparation. People were scared, sure, but they were also stepping up, and Marcus felt something like pride mixing with his fear. The first day was all about getting organized and understanding exactly how bad things were outside. Marcus and Jake took turns on the roof with binoculars, watching the town tear itself apart in slow motion. The dead were everywhere now, shambling through streets that had been peaceful just hours before. They gathered in groups, drawn by sound or maybe just random chance, and wherever they gathered, there was screaming. By noon, the screaming had mostly stopped, and that was somehow worse. It meant there weren't many living people left out there to scream. The walkie-talkies they'd distributed to folks around town had gone quiet too, one by one. A few people had fortified their own homes and were trying to ride it out alone or in small family groups. Marcus didn't give them great odds, but he respected their choice. Around 2 in the afternoon, someone started banging on the community center's back door, the one that opened onto the delivery alley. Marcus was there in seconds with his rifle raised, peering through the peephole. It was Danny Wright and his girlfriend Melissa Stone, both of them covered in blood and grime and looking like they'd run through hell to get there. "Please," Danny was gasping, pounding on the metal with both fists. "Please let us in. They're right behind us." Marcus could see them too, maybe a dozen dead stumbling into the alley, closing the distance fast. "Jake!" Marcus hollered, and Jake was there instantly with Tommy right behind him. They'd talked about this scenario, about what to do if more survivors showed up. Opening the door was a risk. You never knew who might be bitten, might be infected, might turn into one of those things while you were sleeping. But you also couldn't just leave people to die, not when you had the means to help. That wasn't who they were. "We let them in," Jake decided. "Fast and clean. Marcus, cover the door. Tommy, you check them for bites soon as they're through." They slid the bar back and cracked the door just wide enough for 2 people to squeeze through. Danny and Melissa practically fell inside, and Marcus slammed the door shut again the second they were clear. One of the dead had gotten close enough to slap its hand against the metal, and the bang echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Tommy and Lisachin took Danny and Melissa into one of the side rooms for examination while Marcus and Jake resecured the door. "That was close," Tommy said when they emerged 10 minutes later. "But they're clean. No bites, no scratches. Just scared out of their minds." The pattern repeated itself 3 more times that first day. Small groups of survivors making desperate runs for the community center, the security team weighing the risks, and ultimately deciding that being human meant taking those risks. By nightfall, they had 173 people inside the building, packed and tight but alive. Jake organized a watch rotation, for people on the roof at all times with radios and weapons. Marcus took the first night shift along with Tommy, a young woman named Ashley Rodriguez who'd been a cop in the city before moving back to Millbrook, and Kevin Park, who owned the town's only bar and had a shotgun he clearly knew how to use. The night was when things got really creepy. The dead didn't sleep, didn't rest, didn't do anything except wander and hunt. From the roof, Marcus could see them moving through the streets below, sometimes alone, sometimes in packs. They were drawn to light and sound, so Jake had ordered all the windows covered with blackout curtains and everyone to keep their voices down. The community center sat in darkness and near silence while the dead owned the town around them. Marcus had never felt so much like prey in his entire life. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind, every distant moan set his nerves jangling. "My brother was in New York when this started," Ashley said quietly, breaking the silence. She was scanning the street with a night vision scope they'd scavenged from the police station before abandoning it. "He stopped answering his phone on day 2. I keep thinking maybe he made it out, maybe he's in some shelter like this one, but..." She trailed off, and Marcus didn't know what to say. Everybody in the building had lost someone, or thought they had. The scope of this thing was just too big to wrap your head around. "We're alive," he said finally. "Right now, in this moment, we're alive. That's something." Day 2 brought new challenges. The food situation was better than expected thanks to Rachel's organization, but water was going to be a problem. The community center's toilets were already struggling with the load of nearly 200 people, and nobody wanted to think about what would happen if the plumbing gave out. Jake called a meeting of what he was calling the Leadership Council, which was basically anyone willing to make hard decisions. They gathered in one of the side rooms while the rest of the survivors tried to keep themselves busy in the main hall. Besides Jake and Marcus, there was Bill Hendricks the mayor, Lisa Chen handling medical stuff, Rachel Kowalski managing supplies, and Tommy Garcia representing the security team. "We need to think long-term," Jake said, spreading a hand-drawn map of Millbrook across the table. "We've got maybe 10 days of food if we're careful, less if more survivors show up. Water could become critical in 3 or 4 days. We're sitting tight for now, but eventually, we're gonna need to venture out." The room went quiet as everyone absorbed that. Going outside meant facing those things, meant risking infection and death. But staying inside meant slowly starving. "There's a grocery store 4 blocks away," Tommy pointed out, tapping the map. "If we could get there and back, we'd be set for weeks." "4 blocks might as well be 4 miles with the number of those things out there," Bill said, shaking his head. "We'd need a vehicle, a plan, and a whole lot of luck." Lisa Chen leaned forward, her expression grim. "There's another issue we need to discuss," she said quietly. "I've been checking everyone, and we're dealing with the normal stuff you'd expect: anxiety, exhaustion, a few minor injuries. But we've got 3 people with chronic conditions. Old Mr. Patterson needs insulin for his diabetes. Cindy Walsh needs medication for her heart. And little Emma Brooks has asthma. We've got enough supplies for maybe a week, then they're in real trouble." Marcus felt the weight of that settle over the room like a wet blanket. They weren't just fighting for survival day to day. They had to think about keeping people healthy, keeping them functioning. "The pharmacy is next to the grocery store," he said slowly. "If we're making a supply run anyway." Jake nodded, already thinking it through. "We'd need a team. Fast, quiet, armed. Get in, grab what we need, get out. Minimal risk." "There's no such thing as minimal risk out there," Rachel said, and she wasn't wrong. "But we don't have a choice, do we?" She looked around the table, and Marcus saw the same resolution on everyone's faces. They were scared, sure, but they were also fighters. They hadn't given up yet, and they weren't planning to start. The council spent the next 2 hours hammering out a plan for a supply run, debating routes and team composition and what to do if things went sideways. By the time they emerged from the room, they had something that might work, assuming their luck held. Jake announced the plan to the larger group that evening, and Marcus watched the reactions ripple through the crowd. Fear, mostly, but also hope. People wanted to believe they had a future beyond hiding in this building. A few folks volunteered for the supply team, including Danny Wright, who said he owed them for saving his life. Jake picked his team carefully: himself, Marcus, Tommy, Ashley Rodriguez, and Kevin Park. 5 people, all with skills and experience, all understanding the risks. They'd go at dawn when the dead seemed least active, use Jake's pickup truck to minimize time exposed, and stick to the plan no matter what. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He lay on his designated patch of floor in the main hall, listening to the sound of nearly 200 people breathing and shifting and occasionally crying out in nightmares. Rachel Kowalski was a few feet away with her kids curled up against her. Derek had finally stopped asking about his Xbox and started asking if his dad was okay. Rachel lied and said yes, and Marcus didn't blame her one bit. Sometimes lies were kinder than truth. He thought about the supply run, ran through the plan over and over in his mind, tried to anticipate what could go wrong. The list was pretty much endless. Dawn came too fast and too slow at the same time. The supply team gathered in the back hallway while everyone else stayed quiet in the main hall. Jake had parked his pickup truck right outside the delivery door before they'd locked down, and that was their ticket. The plan was simple: pile in, drive 4 blocks to the shopping center, load up with food and medicine and water, then haul ass back. They'd timed it at maybe 20 minutes if everything went perfect. Marcus figured 30 was more realistic, and that was assuming nothing went wrong. Ashley had the keys, Tommy had a written list of medical supplies from Lisa, and everyone had weapons. Marcus carried his hunting rifle and a crowbar. The rifle was for distance. The crowbar was for close-up, because shooting attracted attention and attention was the last thing they needed. Remember, Jake said, looking each of them in the eye. Quiet, fast, and we stick together. Nobody plays hero. Nobody takes unnecessary risks. We're in and out, nothing fancy. They all nodded, and then Jake was sliding the bar back from the door. The sound of metal on metal seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Marcus's heart was hammering so hard he thought everyone could probably hear it. Ashley cracked the door open and peered out into the alley. The sun was just starting to come up, painting everything in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if the world wasn't ending. Clear, Ashley whispered, and they moved. The team slipped out into the alley and piled into Jake's truck, Marcus and Tommy in the bed with their rifles ready, the others in the cab. The engine turned over with a rumble that sounded like thunder in the quiet morning, and every single one of them held their breath. Down the street, Marcus saw shapes start to move, turning toward the sound. Go, 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 Jake muttered, and the truck lurched into motion. They covered the 4 blocks in under a minute, weaving around abandoned cars and trying not to look too closely at the bodies littering the streets. The shopping center parking lot was a mess, cars everywhere, debris scattered across the asphalt. Jake pulled the truck right up to the grocery store entrance and killed the engine. The automatic doors were shattered, glass crunching under their boots as they approached. Kevin, you watch our backs, Jake ordered. Everyone else, inside. Quick and quiet. The grocery store was dark and reeked of spoiled food and something worse, something rotten and organic that Marcus didn't want to think about. They moved through the aisles with flashlights, grabbing canned goods and bottled water and anything with a long shelf life. Marcus was loading his 3rd case of water when he heard Tommy hiss a warning. We got company. 3 of them, coming from the back. Marcus turned and saw the dead shambling out of the stockroom, drawn by the sound and movement. They'd been employees once, still wore their store uniforms. Now they were just hungry. Don't shoot unless we have to, Jake said quietly. He moved forward with his crowbar raised and brought it down on the first one's skull with a sickening crunch. The dead thing dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Ashley took the second one out with a baseball bat, and Tommy handled the 3rd with his knife. It was brutal and ugly and efficient, and Marcus felt his breakfast trying to come back up. But they didn't have time for squeamishness. They loaded the truck with everything they could carry, then headed for the pharmacy next door. The pharmacy was locked up tight, metal security gate down over the entrance. Damn it, Marcus muttered, but Kevin was already pulling bolt cutters from his bag. Brought these just in case, he said with a grim smile. The bolt cutters made short work of the padlock, and they hauled the security gate up just high enough to slip under. Inside, Tommy and Ashley made straight for the prescription counter while the others kept watch. They had Lisa's list, and they moved fast, grabbing bottles and stuffing them into backpacks. Marcus saw insulin, heart medication, asthma inhalers, antibiotics, painkillers. They took everything that might be useful. We're good, Tommy called after maybe 5 minutes. Let's move. They were sliding back under the security gate when Marcus heard it, a sound that turned his blood to ice. It was an engine, multiple engines, coming fast. A convoy of 3 vehicles came tearing into the parking lot, big pickup trucks with armed people in the beds. They screeched to a stop, blocking the exit, and a dozen people jumped out with guns pointed at Jake's team. Well, said a big guy with a shaved head and a shotgun. Looks like we got ourselves some competition for supplies. Marcus raised his rifle instinctively, but Jake put a hand on his arm. Easy, Jake said quietly. Then, louder, to the newcomers, we're not looking for trouble. Just getting supplies for our people. There's plenty here for everyone. The bald guy laughed, but there was no humor in it. See, that's where you're wrong, friend. We got maybe 50 people to feed, and we aim to take everything in this shopping center. So here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna leave those supplies, leave your truck, and walk away. Do that, and nobody gets hurt. That's not gonna happen, Jake said, and his voice had gone cold and hard. Marcus knew that tone. It was the voice Jake used right before things got violent. The standoff stretched out for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Marcus could see the calculations happening on both sides, everyone trying to figure out if this was worth dying over. The problem was, for folks trying to keep their communities alive, pretty much everything was worth dying over. Marcus tightened his grip on his rifle and tried to figure out which target he'd take if bullets started flying. Then Ashley did something brilliant. She pulled a bottle of pills from her bag and held it up. "You got anyone with diabetes in your group?" she called out. "Heart problems? We're taking medicine too, not just food. We got people who'll die without it. I'm guessing you do too." The bald guy's expression flickered, uncertainty crossing his face. "We can share the supplies," Ashley continued, her voice calm and reasonable. "There's 3 stores here. We take one, you take the others. Nobody has to die today." The tension ratcheted down a couple notches. The bald guy lowered his shotgun slightly and had a quick, quiet conversation with a couple of his people. Finally, he turned back to Jake's team. "All right," he said grudgingly. "You take what you got, we'll hit the other stores. But if we see you again, if you come back here trying to take more, we won't be so friendly. Clear?" Jake nodded slowly. "Crystal. Where are you folks holed up, if you don't mind me asking?" "Old textile mill on the east side of town," the bald guy said. "We got it fortified pretty good." "You?" Jake hesitated, then said, "Community center, west side." Marcus wanted to kick him for giving up their location, but he understood the play. Information for information. Maybe these folks could be allies instead of enemies. Maybe. The bald guy nodded. "Name's Garrett Hayes. You're smart, you'll stay on your side of town and we'll stay on ours. World's gone to hell. No need for us to help it along." "Agreed," Jake said. They backed toward their truck slowly, weapons still ready, while Garrett's people did the same. Nobody wanted to turn their back first. Marcus climbed into the truck bed with his rifle still trained on the other group, and it wasn't until they'd pulled out of the parking lot and put 2 blocks between them that he finally let himself breathe. "Holy hell," Tommy said, his voice shaking. "I thought we were all dead for sure." Jake glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "We almost were. Ashley, that was some quick thinking back there." The trip back to the community center took longer than planned because they had to detour around a massive pileup on Main Street, but they made it without further incident. The people inside cheered when they saw the supplies, actually cheered, and Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. They'd done it. They'd gone out into that nightmare and come back alive with enough food and medicine to buy them real time. Lisa Chen nearly cried when Tommy handed over the medications. "You just saved 3 lives, she said. You know that, right?" The council met again that afternoon to debrief and figure out next steps. The encounter with Garrett's group had been a wake-up call. They weren't the only survivors in Millbrook, which was good, but it also meant competition for resources, which was bad. "We need to think about the long term," Bill Hendricks said, looking older and more tired than Marcus had ever seen him. "We can't stay locked in this building forever. Eventually, the supplies run out. Eventually, we need a real plan for survival." "What are you suggesting?" Rachel asked. Bill spread his hands. "I'm suggesting we need to think about creating a real safe zone. Not just this building, but a whole section of town. Clear it out, fortify it, make it livable. Grow food, collect rainwater, establish some kind of normal life." Marcus felt his eyebrows rise. It was an ambitious plan, maybe crazy ambitious. But then again, they'd already survived this long against impossible odds. Maybe crazy was what they needed. "We'd need more people," Jake said thoughtfully. "Right now, we've got enough bodies to defend this building, barely. To hold and clear a whole section of town, we'd need to find other survivors, bring them in, organize a real defensive force." Tommy leaned forward. "What about Garrett's group? I know we just met them and it almost went south, but they've got 50 people. Together, we'd have over 200. That's enough to actually do something." "That's assuming they'd work with us," Ashley pointed out. "And assuming we can trust them." The debate went on for another hour, but ultimately, they decided to at least try making contact with Garrett's group. The alternative was staying cooped up in the community center until they slowly starved or went crazy, and that wasn't really living. Jake volunteered to lead a small diplomatic team, and after everything he'd already done, nobody felt right telling him no. The next morning, Jake, Marcus, and Ashley set out for the old textile mill with a white flag tied to a hockey stick and prayers on their lips. The mill was on the far east side of Millbrook, and the journey there revealed just how thoroughly the town had been overrun. The dead were everywhere, stumbling through yards and lurking in buildings. The team moved carefully, using back alleys and staying quiet, but twice they had to fight their way through small groups of the undead. By the time they reached the mill, Marcus's crowbar was covered in dark, sticky blood, and his hands were shaking from adrenaline. The mill was impressive, a big 3-story brick building surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Garrett's people had reinforced the fence with scrap metal and plywood, creating a real perimeter. Guards on the roof spotted Jake's team when they were still a block away, and a voice called out through a megaphone, "That's far enough. State your business." Jake waved the white flag. "It's Jake Morrison from the community center. We want to talk to Garrett Hayes." Diplomatic meeting. There was a long pause, then the voice said, "Stay where you are." 20 tense minutes passed before a gate in the fence opened and Garrett himself emerged with 4 armed escorts. He walked up to Jake's team with his shotgun lowered but ready. "Wasn't expecting to see you again so soon," Garrett said. "What do you want?" Jake lowered the white flag. "To propose an alliance. Our 2 groups working together to create a real safe zone in Millbrook. Pool resources, share labor, defend a larger area." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Why would we do that? We're doing fine on our own." Marcus stepped forward. "Are you, though? How long can you hold out in that mill? What happens when the food runs out, when you need parts or medicine or just more space? We're stronger together than separate." Garrett studied them for a long moment, and Marcus couldn't read his expression. Finally, the big man said, "Come inside. Let's talk properly." The interior of the textile mill was a revelation. Garrett's people had turned it into a functional community, with sleeping areas and a kitchen and even a small garden started in what used to be the shipping bay. They had 53 people, Garrett explained, including some with valuable skills, a former army sergeant, a construction foreman, a nurse, and even an engineer. "We've been making plans too," Garrett admitted as they sat in what used to be the mill's break room. "Trying to figure out how to survive long-term. Truth is, 50 people isn't enough. We can hold this building, but we can't expand. Can't really thrive." The negotiations took most of the day. Both sides were cautious, nobody wanted to give up their autonomy or put their people at risk. But slowly, a framework emerged. The 2 groups would remain separate but allied, sharing intelligence and resources. They'd work together to clear and fortify a section of town between the community center and the textile mill, creating a safe corridor. Any survivors found would be offered protection with either group. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. "We're gonna need a name," Garrett said as they shook hands on the agreement. "Something that represents what we're trying to do." Jake smiled for the first time in days. "How about the Last Refuge? Because that's what we are. The last safe place in Millbrook." Garrett nodded slowly. "The Last Refuge. I like it." The journey back to the community center felt different somehow. Marcus still had to crack skulls and avoid the dead, but now he felt something he hadn't felt since this nightmare began: hope. They had a plan, they had allies, and they had a chance. When they reported the success to the council, the reaction was cautiously optimistic. Rachel even smiled, the first real smile Marcus had seen from her. "So we're really doing this," she said. "We're actually going to try to take back our town." The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Jake and Garrett's people began the dangerous work of clearing the streets between the community center and the textile mill, block by bloody block. They developed tactics, learned how to move as units, figured out how to kill the dead efficiently and quietly. Marcus became something he'd never expected to be, a soldier in an undeclared war against an enemy that didn't feel pain or fear or anything except hunger. They lost people. Kevin Park got bitten during a clearing operation and had to be put down before he turned. A woman named Jennifer Cole from Garrett's group got separated from her team and was torn apart before anyone could reach her. Each death hit hard, reminded everyone how fragile their survival was. But they also succeeded. They cleared 4 full blocks, established guard posts at key intersections, and even rescued another dozen survivors who'd been hiding in basements and attics. The safe corridor became a reality, and people started moving more freely between the community center and the textile mill. Gardens were planted in yards, supplies were organized, and something like normal life began to emerge. Kids played in the streets during daylight hours, always under heavy guard. People shared meals, told stories, fell in love, and mourned the world that was lost. Marcus found himself becoming part of something bigger than himself, a community that was choosing to survive rather than just existing. 1 month after the outbreak began, the Leadership Council held a meeting that included representatives from both the community center and the textile mill. They'd achieved what once seemed impossible, a stable, defended zone in the heart of Millbrook with over 230 people. But challenges remained. Food was still tight, medical supplies were running low, and nobody knew what the long-term future looked like. The dead still outnumbered the living, and who knew what was happening in the rest of the country, the rest of the world? "We've built something here," Jake said, addressing the full council. "Something worth protecting. But we can't get complacent. We need to keep expanding, keep finding survivors, keep building toward a future." Marcus nodded in agreement. He thought about those first terrifying days, the screaming, the chaos, the fear. They'd come so far. They'd turned a small town into a fortress, strangers into family, desperation into determination. Bill Hendricks stood up, and everyone went quiet. The mayor had lost weight, his clothes hanging loose on his frame, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "I've been thinking a lot about what happens next," he said. "About what kind of world we're building here in the Last Refuge. And I think we need to remember something important. We're not just trying to survive. We're trying to stay human. That means laws, fairness, compassion. It means helping others when we can, even when it's hard or dangerous. It also means making hard choices," Garrett added. "We've been lucky so far, but winter's coming. We need more food, more fuel, more of everything. That means bigger supply runs, maybe into the city. It means risk." The room went quiet as everyone contemplated that. The city was Hartford, 20 miles away, and nobody had any illusions about what it would be like there. If Millbrook had fallen hard, a city would be a charnel house. "We've got 3 months to prepare," Lisachin said. 3 months to train, plan, and get ready for a major supply run. If we're smart and careful, we can do this. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of people who'd become his family, his community, his reason for getting up every morning and fighting. They'd survived the impossible already. They'd taken a world gone mad and carved out a space for hope. "The Last Refuge," he said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. "That's what we call this place, right? But maybe it's more than just a name. Maybe it's a promise. A promise that no matter what comes, we'll keep this light burning. We'll keep fighting. We'll keep being human." Silence followed his words, and then Rachel started clapping. Others joined in, and suddenly the whole room was applauding, not for Marcus specifically, but for what they'd all accomplished together. That night, Marcus took his turn on watch on the community center roof. The stars were out, bright and clear in a sky no longer hazed by city lights. The streets below were quiet, the dead had learned to avoid the safe zone after enough of them got put down. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Life, persisting even in the apocalypse. Ashley joined him halfway through the shift, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Couldn't sleep," she explained, handing him one. "Kept thinking about everything." "Yeah," Marcus said. "I know the feeling." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching over the town they'd fought so hard to protect. You think we're gonna make it? Ashley asked finally. Long term, I mean. You think this is sustainable? Marcus thought about it, really thought about it. I think we've got a chance, he said slowly. A real chance. We've got good people, strong leadership, and a plan. That's more than most folks have right now. Ashley nodded. My brother called me crazy, you know. Before everything went bad. I left my job in the city to move back to this tiny town, and he thought I'd lost my mind. Said I was wasting my potential. She laughed, but there was pain in it. Turns out, this tiny town might be the only reason I'm alive. Marcus put a hand on her shoulder. We're all here for different reasons. But we're all fighting for the same thing now, a future. The weeks turned into months, and the Last Refuge continued to grow and evolve. More survivors trickled in from surrounding areas, drawn by rumors of a safe place. The population swelled to over 300, then 350. New challenges emerged: governance, justice, education for the kids, maintaining morale. But they faced each challenge the same way they'd faced the initial outbreak, together, with determination and creativity and an unwillingness to give up. Jake and Garrett became co-leaders in all but name, their different leadership styles complementing each other. Jake was tactical and careful, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Garrett was bold and decisive, willing to take calculated risks. Together, they made decisions that kept people alive and gave them hope. Marcus found himself becoming Jake's right-hand man, the person who could translate between the cautious and the bold, who could see both sides of every argument. The supply run to Hartford was planned for early fall, before the weather turned bad. They assembled a team of 20 people, the best fighters and scavengers from both communities. They spent a month preparing, studying maps, gathering intelligence from survivors who'd escaped the city, planning routes, and contingencies. Marcus was chosen to lead one of the 5-person teams, and the responsibility weighed heavy on his shoulders. The night before the run, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked the quiet streets of the safe zone, marveling at what they'd built. There were lights in windows, carefully rationed but present. There were gardens growing food, water collection systems, even a small school where Rachel taught the kids during the day. They'd created a pocket of civilization in a world of chaos. And tomorrow, he'd risk his life to help it survive. Big day tomorrow, a voice said, and Marcus turned to find Bill Hendricks sitting on his porch. The mayor gestured to the chair next to him, and Marcus sat. I've been thinking about giving a speech, Bill continued. Something inspirational for the team before you head out. But honestly, I don't know what to say. How do you inspire people who are already doing the impossible? Marcus smiled in the darkness. You tell them the truth, Bill. You tell them that what they're doing matters. That every supply they bring back, every day they survive, every choice they make to stay human in this nightmare, it all matters. We're writing the story of how humanity survived the end of the world. That's something worth risking everything for. Bill was quiet for a long moment, then he reached over and gripped Marcus's shoulder. When did you get so wise? He asked. You used to be just a kid who couldn't wait to leave this town. That was a lifetime ago, Marcus said. Different world, different person. This place, these people, they changed me. Gave me something worth fighting for. He stood up and stretched. I should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's gonna be rough. Bill stood too, and to Marcus's surprise, the old man pulled him into a hug. You come back safe, you hear me? We need you. This place needs you. The Hartford run was everything they'd feared and more. The city was a nightmare of abandoned cars and wandering dead, whole neighborhoods burned to the ground, others eerily intact but empty of life. Marcus's team cleared a pharmacy and a sporting goods store, fighting through dozens of the undead, losing one person to a bite and another to a fall from a second-story window. But they also succeeded, bringing back trucks loaded with medicine, weapons, tools, and food. The cost was high, but the payoff was survival. They returned to the Last Refuge battered and mourning their losses, but also triumphant. The supplies they'd gathered would see the community through winter and beyond. More importantly, they'd proven they could venture out, could take the fight to the dead, could reclaim pieces of the world. That night, the community held a memorial for those who'd been lost, not just from the Hartford run, but from the whole nightmare since it began. Names were read, tears were shed, and Marcus felt the weight of every single person they hadn't been able to save. But the next morning, life went on. That was the thing about the apocalypse, Marcus had learned. You mourned, you hurt, you carried the weight of loss, but you also kept going. Because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant death. The gardens needed tending, the walls needed reinforcing, the children needed teaching. The work of survival never ended, but it also gave life meaning. 6 months after that first terrible dawn when the screaming started, Marcus stood on the roof of the community center and looked out over the Last Refuge. They'd expanded the safe zone to cover 16 blocks, established trade with 2 other survivor communities in nearby towns, and even started talking about long-term plans like electricity and manufacturing. 382 people called this place home now, and that number was growing. It wasn't the world they'd lost. That world was gone, burned away in the fires of plague and chaos. But it was a world nonetheless, built on the ashes of the old one. It was messy and hard and sometimes brutally unfair. People still died, still turned into monsters, still faced horrors every single day. But they also laughed, loved, dreamed, and hoped. They built gardens and told stories and made plans for tomorrow. They stayed human. Jake climbed up onto the roof and stood next to Marcus, following his gaze across the town. Thinking deep thoughts, he asked with a slight smile. Marcus shrugged. Just remembering how it all started. How scared I was that first morning. How sure I was that we were all gonna die. Jake nodded slowly. We should have died. By any reasonable measure, what we did, what we built here, it shouldn't have worked. But it did. Because of you, Marcus said. Your planning, your leadership. Jake shook his head. Not just me. It was everyone. Bill's wisdom, Garrett's courage, Rachel's organization, Lisa's medical skills, your ability to see the big picture. It was Tommy and Ashley and Kevin and Jennifer and all the others who gave everything. It was the whole community choosing to fight instead of surrender. He paused, then added quietly, that's the only way we survive this, Marcus. Together. Down in the street, Marcus could see kids playing tag while adults kept watch. He saw gardens growing and people talking and life happening. Imperfect, fragile, precious life. The Last Refuge, he said. We named it right. This is where humanity makes its stand. Not with armies or governments or institutions. With regular people in a small town who decided that giving up wasn't an option. Jake clapped him on the shoulder. Council meeting in an hour. Garrett's got some proposal about establishing a school for training new security personnel. Rachel wants to talk about expansion plans. Bill's worried about governance as we grow. The usual challenges. Marcus smiled. The fact that we're worried about governance and education and expansion, that we're thinking past tomorrow, that's everything. That's proof we're not just surviving. We're building something that lasts. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, burning away the morning mist, Marcus thought about all the communities out there facing the same struggles. He thought about the people who'd given up, who'd let despair win, and the ones who kept fighting. He thought about the thin line between survival and extinction, between humanity and monstrosity. The Last Refuge wasn't perfect, wasn't safe, wasn't guaranteed to last. But it was real, and it was theirs, and as long as people like Jake and Rachel and Garrett and all the others kept fighting, it would endure. The dead still own most of the world. That was the brutal truth. But here, in 16 blocks of a small American town, the living had claimed victory. They'd created a space where children could play and elders could rest and everyone could dream of tomorrow. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, just a few hundred people in a sea of billions lost. But it was everything to those people, and it was proof that humanity's story wasn't over. Marcus took one last look at the town before heading down to the council meeting. The Last Refuge stood as a testament to human resilience, to the power of community, to the choice to hope even in the darkest times. Whatever came next, whatever challenges and horrors waited in the days and months and years ahead, they would face it the same way they'd faced everything else, together, with courage and determination and an unwavering refusal to let the darkness win. That was the promise of the Last Refuge, and Marcus intended to keep it, no matter what the cost.